Hey guys, Mana here, bringing you another guide. This time I'm going to be talking about how to maximize your damage and do top DPS in WoW. Now, before you guys watch this video, I recommend you download Simulation Craft. Basically, it's a program that lets you upload your character and it will simulate how much damage your character can do under various different circumstances. Typically, I like to see what my damage can be under ideal situations, and the number you see will appear insanely high to you, and that's because it pretty much is. Normally, you won't be achieving those numbers, and no one expects you to, but that's not the point. The point is for you to see how much damage you can do under perfect circumstances if you were to play perfectly, so that you can try to get as close to that as possible, so you can try to continue to better yourself, so you can try to keep getting as close to that as you can. So for this video, I'm going to assume that you already know what kind of gear you should be using, your spell priority, your gems, etc. If you don't already know these things, then you should definitely worry about learning that before watching this video. And if you happen to be a warlock, then you can check out my channel for guides on playing all three warlock specs. So, the first step in doing competitive damage is to not fall into this trap of feeling like you're underpowered. Not just your class, but even your gear. So, if you perform poorly, you need to be able to say that I need to perform better, and not, oh, my gear sucks, or my class needs a buff. Even if your gear isn't amazing and your class is underpowered, saying these things and worrying about these things will only hurt your performance, because you should just be worrying about getting better. Gear will come with time, and if your class really is underpowered, then it's going to get buffed in a patch. So, unlike gear, which you're going to get regardless over time, and buffs, which, come in a patch, you can't just gain skill over time without the right mentality, and there are no patches that can buff your skill. So, to be good, you need to focus on improving your skill. Now, with that said, just because skill is king, that doesn't mean that you can slack off on your gear, your gems, your enchants, your reforging, and using consumables. To do competitive damage, yes, you have to be skilled, but you also need to get any advantage possible. So that means using your food, using flasks, using potions, gemming, enchanting, and reforging your gear. And you always have to be willing to go that extra mile to maximize your potential damage. So this discussion always creates a huge division in the WoW community. Threads with tons of replies, flaming and such. So I don't want to get into it too much. I'll just say this. Clicking is not as good as key binding. It does not seem that way at all to someone that's always clicked. I see all these replies to the threads, people that say that they tried key binding but it wasn't as good, they're way better at clicking or whatever. That's obvious. I mean, key binding is something that takes a while to get used to. It takes a lot of practice. So in the end, it is better, but it does take more effort. So if you do want to go that extra mile, I highly recommend that you put in that extra effort and get comfortable with using a keybind setup. It doesn't have to be, the default. You can modify your keys. So find a setup that works for you. Give it a shot. It's totally worth it to at least try. So to damage dealers, it's obvious that knowing your rotation, knowing your spell priority is important. But to go from being a good player to a great player, you need to know what spells to cast like a chess grandmaster knows what movie he's going to make. In other words, you need to know your rotation so well that you don't even have to think about it. You just know it. To play at a high level, you should be able to know what spell you're going to cast several moments before you actually cast it. So, for instance, if I'm currently casting Shadow Bolt and I see that my Haunt will come off cooldown very soon, I know that I have enough time to cast another Shadow Bolt, and then I have to cast Haunt. This is what I'm talking about. You have to know what spell you're going to cast, a few moments before you actually cast it, so that there's no delay when you actually have to cast it. A, B, C. Always be casting. This is a fundamental rule for damage dealers. Pop quiz. Let's say 2 Warlocks in equal gear spam Shadow Bolts on a target dummy. One of them casts 50 Shadow Bolts and the other one casts 55. Who did more damage? The answer should be obvious to you, and that is what ABC is all about. Encounters have a ton of mechanics that try to force players to not cast spells, and your goal should be to cast as many spells as possible without failing these mechanics. So this means that you need to limit your movement as much as possible and continue to cast spells while you actually are moving. So remember that the more spells that you're able to cast, the more damage you'll deal. We all have cooldowns that let us do more damage, and using these whenever possible is obviously a good thing, but using them together whenever possible is even better. Stacking your cooldowns is an unbelievably good way to increase your damage. So, for instance, if I'm using Demonology and I'm about to start the fight, I'll use a pre-pot, which that's a potion you use right before the boss is pulled, and that way you can use another potion during the fight. So I'll use a pre-pot, I'll use Metamorphosis, Demon Soul, and I'll start my spell rotation, and right there, Dark Moon Card Volcano and my Light Weave Embroidery, they'll both proc, and I'll have all of those cooldowns right at the beginning of the fight. And I'll time my cooldowns later on in the fight based on each other pretty much, so that I can stack them as much as possible and gain an even greater benefit out of them. So the last piece of DPS advice I can give in this video is to use fight mechanics to your advantage. For instance, on Magma, when he gets pinned down, he takes so much more damage. So during this time, this is when you can be popping your cooldowns and just do a ton more damage. And it's important that you take fight mechanics into consideration when you're planning on when you plan out your cooldown use, instead of just arbitrarily just using all of your cooldowns whenever they're up. Because if you time them to when these mechanics will occur, then you will just do way more damage than if you were just using them all together whenever they came off cooldown. Alright guys, so I'm not gonna lie, the things I discussed in this video are a lot harder than I made them sound, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of practice before you start seeing significant results. But if you are looking to maximizing your damage, then these are the things you should be working on. You know, I really do wish there was a guide you could buy that would make you the best player in the world when you finished reading it, but that's just not the case. If you guys really are committed to improving and you do work on the things I discussed, then I promise you that you will be seeing very solid improvements to your DPS. And with that, I'm pretty much done. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you found it useful or helpful, feel free to like, to comment, to subscribe. I'm pretty much done, but I'm not sure how to wrap this up, so I'll just say later, guys.